They say a great man is measured by his ability to admit when he's wrong. This is a quality that separates the truly great from the merely powerful. It's a rare trait, one that requires a deep sense of humility and self-awareness. To look honestly at his failures, learn from them, and strive to do better. This process of introspection and growth is what allows leaders to evolve and improve, making decisions that benefit not just themselves, but the people they serve. But what happens when a man in power refuses to acknowledge his mistakes? When he surrounds himself with yes-men and sycophants who reinforce his flawed decisions? The consequences can be dire, affecting not just his legacy, but the lives of countless others. When pride, and let's be honest, maybe a little bit of daddy issues, cloud judgment, the pressure to live up to a family name or to prove oneself can lead to decisions that are more about personal validation than the greater good. You get situations like the Iraq War, a conflict that was initiated under the guise of protecting national security, but was in reality a complex web of misinformation, misjudgment, and personal agendas. A war built on shifting sands, fueled by misinformation, and ultimately a tragic example of what happens when personal vendettas hijack national policy. The human cost of such decisions is immeasurable, with lives lost, families torn apart, and entire regions plunged into chaos. This ain't about being right or left, folks. It's not a matter of political allegiance or party loyalty. It's about the fundamental principles of leadership and responsibility. This is about right and wrong, the moral compass that should guide every decision made by those in power. When that compass is ignored, the consequences are felt far and wide. And invading a sovereign nation based on faulty intelligence and a personal axe to grind? It's a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. Well, you don't need a Harvard degree to know that's a whole heap of wrong. Common sense and basic human decency tell us that such actions are indefensible. We're talking about the kind of wrong that costs lives, destabilizes entire regions, and leaves a stain on the very soul of a nation. The repercussions of these decisions are felt for generations, shaping the future in ways that are often tragic and irreversible. It's a sobering reminder that the actions of a few can have profound impacts on the many. As we reflect on these mistakes, let us strive to learn from them, to hold our leaders accountable, and to ensure that such errors are not repeated. The true measure of greatness lies not in the absence of mistakes, but in the ability to learn from them and to grow stronger and wiser as a result. George W. Bush, a name that evokes a myriad of emotions and opinions. The man who promised to restore honor and dignity to the Oval Office. He campaigned on a platform of integrity, vowing to bring a new era of respect and responsibility to the highest office in the land. Instead, he gave us mission-accomplished banners and a war based on weapons of mass destruction that were about as real as unicorns. The infamous banner, proudly displayed on the USS Abraham Lincoln, became a symbol of premature celebration and misguided confidence. Look, I'm not saying the guy didn't love America. He clearly did. His patriotism was evident in his every action and speech, but his definition of tough love seemed to involve a whole lot of bombing and very little diplomacy. The Iraq War, launched under the pretext of eliminating weapons of mass destruction, turned into a prolonged conflict with devastating consequences. The thing about mistakes is, we all make them. It's a part of being human. It's what you do after that counts. Do you own up? Do you learn? Do you take responsibility and strive to make amends, or do you deflect, deny, and dig in your heels, or do you double down and pretend you're playing with a full deck when everyone can see you're holding a pair of twos? The latter approach often leads to more significant problems down the line. With the Iraq War, Bush chose the latter. And the consequences? They were far-reaching and long-lasting. The conflict destabilized the region, leading to a power vacuum that gave rise to extremist groups and ongoing violence. Well, we're still living with them today. The impacts of the Iraq War are still felt across the globe, affecting international relations, regional stability, and the lives of countless individuals. The lessons from this chapter in history are clear. Leadership requires humility, accountability, and a willingness to learn from one's mistakes. To understand the younger Bush, you've got to go back to his daddy, George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States, was a man of considerable experience in foreign policy. He had served as vice president under Ronald Reagan and had a long career in public service, including stints as the director of the CIA and ambassador to the United Nations. See Senior Bush. He kicked Saddam out of Kuwait in the first Gulf War. This was a conflict that erupted when Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, decided to invade and annex Kuwait in August 1990. The international community, led by the United States, responded with Operation Desert Storm, a massive military campaign to liberate Kuwait. A decisive victory, no doubt. The coalition forces, with superior technology and strategy, managed to push Iraqi troops out of Kuwait in just 42 days. The victory was celebrated with parades and a sense of triumph, as the US military showcased its might on the global stage. But Saddam remained in power. Despite the military success, the decision was made not to pursue regime change in Iraq. Saddam Hussein continued to rule with an iron fist, and the region remained unstable, a thorn in the old man's side. The presence of Saddam Hussein in power was a constant source of tension and unfinished business for George H.W. Bush. It was a lingering issue that would haunt his presidency and beyond. Unfinished business, as they say. The Gulf War was seen as a success, but the decision not to remove Saddam left a sense of incompletion. Political cartoons and news headlines at the time often depicted this sentiment, highlighting the unresolved nature of the conflict. Now, I'm not saying W invaded Iraq solely to finish what his daddy started. George W. Bush, the 43rd president, had his own reasons for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The post-9/11 world was fraught with fears of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. That would be giving him too much credit. The decision to invade Iraq was influenced by a complex mix of factors, including intelligence reports, political pressure, and the desire to combat perceived threats. But you've got to admit, the whole thing had a whiff of Oedipus complex about it. The psychological dynamics between father and son, especially in the realm of politics, can be fascinating. Some analysts have suggested that George W. Bush's actions were in part influenced by a desire to outdo his father. Like, "Dad, you want to take down Saddam? Hold my beer." This humorous depiction captures the bold and somewhat reckless nature of the younger Bush's decision to invade Iraq, as if he were taking on a challenge to prove himself. Except this beer was laced with faulty intelligence and a whole lot of hubris. The invasion was based on intelligence that later proved to be flawed, and the decision was marked by overconfidence and a lack of understanding of the complexities of the region. Then came 9/11, a day that changed everything. The nation was reeling, angry, scared. We needed someone to blame. And who better than Saddam Hussein? He was a bad guy, we all knew it. Never mind that there was zero evidence linking him to 9/11. He was the villain we already had on the casting couch. The Bush administration played on our fears, told us Iraq was developing WMDs, that they were in cahoots with Al-Qaeda. It was a lie, of course. A big, fat, pants-on-fire lie, but it worked. We went to war, a war based on lies, on vengeance, on a twisted need to settle old scores. Section 5, the ravaging of a nation, Iraq's lost decade. The human cost devastating. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians dead, millions displaced, a country left in ruins. And for what? To eliminate WMDs that never existed? To spread democracy in a region where we didn't understand the complexities? Or was it all just a tragic case of a son trying to outdo his father? The Iraq War wasn't just a foreign policy blunder, it was a moral failure. A failure to learn from history. A failure to question our leaders, and a failure to recognize the humanity of those who live on the other side of the world. Section 6, Selective Outrage, the Cambodia Paradox. And here's the thing about American foreign policy, it's often hypocritical. We're quick to intervene in some places while turning a blind eye to others. Remember Cambodia, the genocide, the millions slaughtered? Where was our righteous indignation then? We didn't invade Cambodia, we didn't topple dictators, we didn't even impose sanctions. Why? Because it wasn't in our strategic interest. There was no oil, no convenient enemy, just millions of innocent people left to die. So yeah, the Iraq War wasn't just about faulty intelligence, it was about a foreign policy driven by self-interest and a dangerous dose of selective morality. The Iraq War is a stark reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked, when leaders are allowed to operate with impunity, to spin narratives without accountability, to wage wars based on lies and personal vendettas. It's a cautionary tale for any democracy. We, the people, have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable, to demand transparency, to question their motives, to refuse to be manipulated by fear and propaganda, because the price of silence, the price of apathy, is far too high. The damage is done, the dead are gone, but the living, we have a responsibility to learn from the mistakes of the past, to rebuild trust, both at home and abroad, to acknowledge the human cost of war, not just in dollars and cents, but in shattered lives and broken dreams. It's time for an honest reckoning, a truth and reconciliation commission, if you will. We need to understand how we got here, how we allowed ourselves to be misled into a war built on lies. Only then can we begin to heal the wounds of the past and chart a new course for the future. Accountability. It's not a buzzword, it's the foundation of a functioning democracy. We can't allow our leaders to escape responsibility for their actions, especially when those actions result in the loss of innocent lives. We need to demand better. We need leaders who are guided by principles, not polls. Leaders who understand that the true measure of a nation's strength lies not in its military might, but in its commitment to justice, truth, and the rule of law. The Iraq War was a tragedy born of hubris, of misinformation, of a foreign policy hijacked by personal vendettas. But it doesn't have to define us. We can learn from our mistakes, we can demand better from our leaders, we can choose a different path. Let us strive for a future where foreign policy is driven by diplomacy, not bombs, where dialogue replaces dogma, where the lives of innocent civilians, both at home and abroad, are held sacred. A future where the ghosts of wars past finally find peace and the world learns to move forward together towards a brighter dawn.